Welcome, grade 11. Today's topic is international trade. Your lesson objectives are as follow. At the end of this lesson, students should be able to identify at least 6 problems associated with international trade. Then students should be able to discuss the problems associated with international trade. Students should then be able to highlight some trade restrictions utilized in the Bahamas and explain the reasons countries have trade restrictions. When buying and selling goods abroad, there are certain problems or obstacles that must be overcome. These problems are not usually experienced by persons um, who trade in their own country. Rather, these problems are experienced by persons who engage in international or foreign trade. And from your previous lessons, you would have learned that international or foreign trade is the exchange or the buying and selling of goods and services between different countries. So if I'm living in the Bahamas and I buy a good from the United States of America or Japan, that's me engaging in international trade. The first problem associated with international trade is documentation. Documentation is needed for trade, but when you engage in international trade, more documents are needed than would be needed for domestic trade. So, for example, where I can just go to the shop and I can purchase 10 cases of chicken to send Andres to my grandmother, and the only thing I would need is the shopping receipt along with her information written on a piece of paper for a store. Let's use extra value, for example. But with international trade or foreign trade, I will need more information and more documents. I will need an invoice, and when I say invoice, I'm talking about export and import invoices, and you're going to learn more about your international documents in another lesson. I will also need documents like an airway bill, that's a bill that is used to show ownership of goods that are being transported via air transportation. I will also need a bill of lading. That's another bill that shows ownership of the goods that are being transferred via sea transport. I will need an invoice. I will need documentary bills. I will need a pro forma invoice. So you're going to learn more about documentations in the next lesson. But just know, for foreign trade, more documents and more information is needed. And as you know, I hope I don't have to recall the definition of foreign trade. Foreign trade is where you engage or exchange goods and services, or you engage in the buying and selling of goods and services with between other countries. And of course, domestic or local trade would be trade within the same country. So, for example, if I'm selling a good to somebody that lives in Freeport or Grand Bahama or Abaco, that would be domestic trade. Okay, so more documents and more information is needed, and that is indeed a challenge for international trade. The next problem associated with international trade, which you see on your screen, are dollars. So that's currency, okay? Foreign currencies. Now you see I have on the screen, there is a Bahamian dollar and a US dollar. And those are currencies of two different countries. We have other countries that have different currencies like Canada and Haiti. We have Jamaica, we have Chinese, we have the Japanese, we have the pesos, which is from Mexico. So we have a number of different currencies. And foreign currency is another topic that you'll learn about later on in the 11th or 12th grade. But this just shows us how commerce is so connected. The topics in commerce are so connected to one another. So when buying and selling abroad, money must be changed into the currencies of different countries. And to add to this problem, currency values change basically daily. So, for example, on the 28th of April 2020, before I made this PowerPoint presentation, I researched to see what was the currency of three countries. Jamaica currency, one Bahamian or US dollar, is valued right now 140 Jamaican dollars. Haiti, for example, one US or Bahamian dollar is valued $97.84. The Haiti dollar. And the Canadian dollar, one US dollar is value, or one Bahamian dollar is value, comes up to $1.40 in Canadian dollars. So even though our country, the Bahamas, the dollar is quote unquote on par with the US dollar, other countries can say the same thing. So this is foreign currency exchange, and this in itself makes it a little bit difficult for international trade to take place because you would have to do constant research to figure out how much is my money worth in another country so that I can know how much goods I will be able to afford when I am purchasing goods from those foreign countries. And that's our dollars. Another, you see at the bottom of your screen, it says hello, hola, ni hao, or something, or bonjour. I think I pronounced those correctly. Those are different languages from different countries. Okay, so Bahamian, Spanish. I'm not sure what the yellow one is, and I think that's Bonjour. I think that's Creole. Okay, so foreign language is a big deal when it comes to problems associated with international trade. Basically, you're not going to be able to understand somebody from a different country who you're engaged in international trade with. So sometimes the language of a country you are trading with may be different from the language spoken in your country. You would need a translator, or perhaps you would need um, a dictionary where you can look up certain words if you don't know what the meaning of it is. Thankfully, Siri and Alexa and Google has been very, very helpful to most of us. But this is still a challenge. So, for example, the Bahamas in particular, we trade with a number of countries from South America, which speaks Spanish, and like Chinese and Japanese, which speaks Chinese and Japanese language. So this would be a problem for us. So if we want to actually place an order, let's say for example we're placing an order on AliExpress, and one of the vendors is located in China, we need to be able to at least translate, or we need to be able to communicate in Chinese, or perhaps the Chinese vendor should be able to communicate with us in English, I guess by way of translator. So here we can see how foreign language, sorry, is so important to international trade. Um, because if there's a misunderstanding, a lot of things can go wrong. The wrong goods can be purchased or sent. Um, the wrong amount of money can be sent or given to and from the customer or the seller, respectively. So it poses a great challenge. Another challenge for international trade would be measurements. Okay, so the method used to measure volume, distance, length, and weight differ between countries. So, for example, the US uses inches, feet, and yards, miles, and ounces, while England uses centimeters, meters, and kilometers and grams. So if you would look at the tag of some of your clothing, you would see it's a US size versus a UK size because the sizes run a bit differently. And this makes shopping, or this makes engaging in international trade a little bit difficult. How many of you have ever purchased a clothing item or a shoe item or a shoe product from an online store. And when you got it, you realize that it was either too big or too small. That's because where you are purchasing it from or where it was made more than likely had a difference in measurements. So we have to, it's like a trial and error process when you are engaging in international trade as far as measurements are concerned. Another big deal for international trade as it relates to problems associated with international trade is debts. And when I say debts, I actually mean debt collection. Now, you know, a debt is basically something that is owed to another person. Okay? So if you provide credit to buyers in another country and they do not pay you back on time, it is more difficult to collect the debt from them than it is to collect the debt from someone within your country. Because the reality of it is, you would either have to hire someone in that country to go out and do your business by collecting debt, or you would have to travel to that country to collect debt. Some countries, the tickets just to get to those countries are very expensive. For example, a ticket to get to Jamaica from the Bahamas is roughly $456 based on what I would have checked this morning on the 28th of April 2020. But can you imagine the person only owes you $300? Basically, you would have to pay 700 and something dollars just to get or to collect a 300 and something dollars debt. You're still losing in the long run. So that in itself makes debt collection difficult. Also, when you get to Jamaica, you would have to hire a taxi or Uber, or perhaps you would have to rent a vehicle. You would have to pay for some place to stay. You would have to look into having your food vouchers readily available. So it's going to cost you to basically collect debt. And that in itself can pose a problem for international trade. Whereas if I'm trading with someone within the same country or the same island, let's say for example, I'm trading with someone that lives right in New Providence, all it takes is um $5 worth of gas to locate that individual. Okay? So it's less expensive and it's less challenging on the person selling the goods and services. Another problem associated with international trade is distance and travel. And we're talking about traveling by air or by sea or by land as well, because some land transportation or some land transport is rather long. Long distance to travel can be a problem, and arranging transport for this can cost a lot more time and money. And I would have basically explained this when I talked about debt collection. You having to travel someplace outside your residence or outside your country. It can be a bit costly. It can take a lot of time, and the same thing applies as it relates to, um, let's say for example, I need to send something from China, from the Bahamas to the United States, and it's a bulky material, which means I need to use a sea transport. Um, but these items are perishable. The chances are these items can perhaps spoil or go bad while in transit to another country, and that in itself poses a problem. Now, to basically assist with um, international trade, or to encourage persons to not trade as much, because of course our goal is to make sure our country dollar value stays on par, and one of the ways we can do that is by having more exports than imports. So basically, to control this, our government or our country put in place trade restrictions. Okay, so there are basically two types of subsidies. But before I get into that, let's really look at what a subsidy is. A subsidy is um, basically an amount of money or some sort of finance assistance that the government gives towards the cost of home produce products to enable it to be sold at a basically at a lower price. And that's what a subsidy is. So this is the first thing the government does to assist us. They provide us with a subsidy. Okay. In addition to that, the government provides us with, the government imposed tariffs, not provides us with, they impose tariffs. And a tariff, these are basically tax or customs duty imposed on imported goods to raise the price of foreign goods to human consumers and thus protect the home market. So the home market. So for example, when you travel to the United States of America, or when you just go on Amazon or eBay and you purchase something, certain things that you bring back into the country, you have to pay tax on them. And the reason why the government is doing this is because they are intentionally trying to deter persons living within the Bahamas from importing goods. So by paying a tax on something, the consumer is automatically going to assume that, okay, I'm not assume, but the consumer is automatically going to think that me importing this good makes the good more expensive. Perhaps I should buy locally. And that's what a tariff is. It's a duty imposed on a duty imposed on imported goods. And basically, customs duty for a long time has been one of the government's greatest source of revenue into our country. Before VAT came along, now VAT seems to be the greatest source of revenue. And I think road traffic with vehicles, licenses, and registrations fall third in place, somewhere along the line. Okay. Um, these duties or these taxes um, is collected by the Customs Department. And usually, customs is set up at our entrance into the country. So, for example, at the airports and seaports, that's where you would normally find customs departments. We have two types of tariffs. We have specific duties, and we have the valorem duties. And basically, the specific duty is it's like a set price for each imported item, and the ad valorem duties are calculated as a percentage of the value of the import. So specific duties, you know the price, it's set. Ad valorem duties, they're not set. It's a percentage of the item being imported. Okay? And those are your two types of tariffs. The government also imposes an embargo. And this is a straightforward government ban on trading between one country and another. So, for example, they would ban certain things from being imported into the country. Let's use, for example, sweet peppers. I remember about a year ago, sweet peppers and tomato. I think it was sweet peppers and tomatoes were temporarily banned from being imported into the country because the government wanted to give the home producers an opportunity to harvest and sell their crops. Another example would be the face mask. That was recently, with an exception of medical masks for medical purposes, face mask was recently banned from our country to give home local producers an opportunity to get the market going. Another trade restriction can also be quotas, and a quotas is a limit on um, the quantity of a product allowed into the country during the year. So, for example, the government may actually say, okay, you will only be able to import 1,500 chickens per year. That's a quota. Okay. So if now there are some instances whereby persons can go over this quota, but an import license must be obtained before goods subject to quota restrictions can actually be imported. So you can import more than the government say, but you have to get a import license. And of course, getting an import license means you have to pay for that. And paying for that is going to deter people from actually wanting to get that import license. So these are all trade restrictions the government put in place to kind of like increase exports but decrease imports. So now that we've already discussed the problems associated with international trade, and we've looked at some of the trade restrictions put in place to protect our country. Now we're going to talk about the reasons why these trade restrictions must be put in place, okay? And the first one is to protect home producers. Um, Infantly or newly formed businesses or industries may need protection until they have become rather sufficiently established to be able to compete fairly. Or if you're not newly formed or you're not new, then other industries may simply need protection because they are important to future national security. Another reason why some countries may impose trade restrictions are to resist dumping. And dumping, in other words, I mean, when I say dumping, I mean selling goods at a loss abroad. Some countries dump goods abroad either to reduce supplies at home or to increase their share of the market overseas in other countries. And this kind of action can be very damaging to some industries in the country where the goods are being dumped. Because if I'm having goods being dumped into our country at a very low cost, persons living within that country and would more than likely buy those lower price goods, and local producers won't be able to get their goods sold. Okay. Countries also put trade restrictions in place to safeguard jobs. Even when jobs are brought into a country fairly and competitively, their import um, may threaten a particular industry. So, under such circumstances, the importing country may feel it is necessary to introduce trade restrictions to protect their job market. Because a country doesn't want unemployment rate to increase drastically, so they must put these measures in place. And last but not least, these trade restrictions are imposed to correct a balance of payment deficit. And if you would remember, your balance of payment is calculated by taking away total imports from total exports, and a continuous balance of payment, if it goes ignored, will not be good for a country. And one way in which a deficit can be rectified is by reducing import, by imposing or introducing import control through trade restrictions. Okay? And those are the reasons why countries must have trade restrictions, some which can be heartbreaking at first, or they can seem a bit cruel, but they are basically needed. It's a necessity. And that brings us to the end of our lesson. So thank you for watching. Please play the video back as much as you need to understand concepts that were taught. And your activity will follow this lesson shortly. Have a good day until next time.